Pasir Ris by Tse Hao Guang. Whitening this beach again like a blank page, the moon allows me space to alter my will. All its indifference is a different rage. I pace the sand, animal in a cage, watch footsteps vanish, pale air still whitening this beach. Again, like a blank page, words will not come. The gall of the end of an age sits bitter on the tongue, overspills all. Its indifference is a different rage. These murmurs repeat the language of sin, some legacy spat from across the hills, whitening this beach again, like a blank page, a bleached bone. Silver light falls strange on the sea. Can every story untold fill all its indifference? Is a different rage lesser rage? No. My steps might change, tracing the script of Walcott's codicil, whitening this beach again, like the blank page. All its indifference is a different rage. Yep. So what do you think about this poem?
Yeah, so the first very striking image I would say it's that this idea of the beach.
Mm-hmm.
And I think upon the very mention of the beach, the first other image that I associated that with was the ocean, how it's very vast, it's almost infinite. And I would say that kind of suggests like the infinite nature of language and all the possibilities that come along with it. And I think
Mm.
it also helps to really enhance the reflective mood of the poem as well.
Yeah, like an image of someone just strolling on the beach and then trying to think of something to write. But whereas for me, I think the ocean symbolized more of consciousness rather than language. But I guess they're quite intertwined because for a poet, language comes from consciousness. And when you're writing poetry, you're led by
Right.
language and you're led by consciousness. And there's something oceanic about that consciousness that you do not really know what you want to get at. And that's why, I mean, in the penultimate stanza, we see silver light falls strange on the sea. And I guess that's something that's it's like you try to get at what you're trying to write, what you're trying to say, but there's something strange about it because it's not clear cut. I mean, in writing poetry, there's mist, there's fog. You need to spend time thinking about what you're trying to express, really.
Right, right. And I think that idea is conveyed very well here. So I think in the first stanza, the there's a line that says, "The moon allows me space to alter my will," right?
Mm,
And maybe here we can talk about the two interpretations of will. So that
yeah,
between legacy and intention.
yeah.
And what you said regarding the idea of murkiness in
Yeah.
writing, where there's not really a true sense of self-determination. Like when you're writing a piece, it's not really very clear cut. You don't have a very clear direction
Yeah.
from the start of it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it just made me think of, I don't know, somewhere like I read before, like this idea in philosophy where it kind of suggests that humans don't really have any true self-agency and they're controlled by this higher like consciousness called the will.
The will.
And yeah, so every event, every choice that
Mm.
we seemingly make is actually not of our own.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings me to actually the next image in
The
the second
animal in the
stanza,
cage.
animal in a cage.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have anything that you would like to say about that firstly?
I mean, not really, but I thought of the Jaguar randomly, like the Jaguar by Ted Hughes. I don't remember exactly what that poem was about. Was it about being unfree and free at the same time?
I haven't read it before. Maybe
Okay.
you can.
Okay, but
Yeah,
like
do you want to
Animal
talk
in a
about it?
Cage, I think you were talking about freedom just now, right? Free will. Like Animal in a Cage, you suggest that when it comes to human existence, we're not truly free. And there's this, and I think this, you also get this in writing because you don't really know where we're getting at, right? And being an animal in a cage, you're free in the sense that there's a certain room for you to navigate in, but ultimately you're still within certain constraints that you can't get out of.
Oh,
Yeah, I
I
mean, what do you
see.
think about the image?
Yeah, I didn't really think of any specific animal, but
Mm,
you mentioned about there being a room in that cage for us to, so there's this limited measure of agency that we are
yeah,
assigned. And yeah, it's interesting. I think very well it very much links back to that idea of the beach
yeah.
in which the infinite sea is like right in front of us, it's within our
Mhm.
reach, but uh as far as we are concerned, we are just limited to the boundary of the shore that we're on. Yeah, and I also see this notion of transience
Mm-hmm.
and temporality in the line, watch footsteps vanish, pale air still, whitening this beach. So that's a reference to like our mortality, I would
Yeah.
say.
I think there's some
And
contrast between
yeah,
our mortality, like the how temporary our existence is, and our writing compared to how the ocean, how nature has existed for so long, and it's just indifferent to our trying to make sense of our existence and trying to leave something behind, I think.
right. So there is actually this caesura here, right? Where in the third stanza,
Mm-hmm.
where after words will not come, there's a full stop.
Yeah.
And then it goes on to the goal of the end of an age.
Yeah.
So maybe you want to comment on the meter here because I'm not very good at talking about meter.
Oh, okay. I thought this line was quite interesting because there are two parts to it, right? Words will not come. And that's quite self-explanatory. I mean, poet trying to find the words that he truly wants to say, the things that he truly wants to mean. And the full stop, the caesura, it perfectly represents visually um the stoppage of thought, but the uncontinuity, like how hard it is, the struggle of trying to say something that you truly mean. And then we move on to something that the second part of the line, which flows more elegantly and naturally, the goal of the end of an age. I mean, there's a rhythm to it, right? The dab, da, da, dab, da, da, da. And then,
Mm,
yeah, and then when we look at the content of that part of the line, right, of the end of an age, I mean, I'm reminded of literary tradition because we're thinking about legacy, literary tradition, just thinking writers, we don't write in a silo, right? When we write, we think about what past writers have written about. And so I'm thinking words will not come because you're not simply trying to say just what you mean. You're also thinking about, you're also struggling against what past writers have written. You're trying to participate in a literary tradition. That's why the goal of the end of an age sits bitter on the tongue, over spills all. Yeah.
so yeah, I see that being referenced in the next line where it says, these murmurs repeat the language of sin, some legacy spat from across the hills.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's quite interesting how it's spat from across the hills.
Yeah.
It's very, how do I say this? It's very somewhat grotesque,
Mm.
a bit uh, disgusting. It's kind of like someone hurling an insult at you.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if this is a
But
stretch, but you know, like
right,
most Singaporean poets write in English, and English isn't exactly our native language, right? So there's
mm,
some kind of post-colonial theme running through this poem as well, which I think is also present in Cortisol. And I think this might be present
right.
in the language of sin, because I mean, colonialism, it was a really violent time for people, for the colonized. And so we're repeating the language of sin. Why are we writing in the language of our colonizers? Yeah, I
Oh,
think that's how I approach this part.
so is that why it's whitening this beach again?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't actually think about that, about colonial legacies.
Maybe
So
I
yeah,
was brought to that by cortisol.
right.
Yeah. I mean, there's a
I
line
think
that
maybe
I'm quite not
yeah,
sure about. It's a different rage, lesser rage. What do you understand by that?
right. So as I think you were commenting upon uh traditions and legacies of
Yeah.
uh past writers, right?
Mm,
Uh literally I interpreted this statement as the speaker trying to ask whether a break from tradition would diminish the quality of their writing or maybe writing in general.
mm-hmm.
And what I think this poem is trying to signal with that very definite no and the
Mm,
full stop that follows
yeah.
after is um, maybe breaking from tradition is not so much a bad thing,
Mm-hmm.
but it still does leave it a bit ambiguous,
Yeah.
where it ends off with tracing the script of Walcott's cortisol whitening this beach again and
Mm,
again and again, like an endless cycle.
yeah.
And yeah, just the final declarative line, all this indifference is a different rage. So there's no definite answer, and we're
Yeah.
just left with more questions.
Mm. Like it's neither the triumph of the present writer nor just resigning himself to fate or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the last thing I would say about this poem is that I feel like it's really a display of virtuosity because it's such a well-written villanelle. The refrains are all like differently phrased in every single stanza.
Hmm.
Yeah, I
I
think
was
that's really
thinking though,
impressive.
because I'm not sure about the history of the villanelle, but might there be something about the villanelle specifically that enhances this poem in some way?
Mm, maybe if maybe it ties back into the idea of, I mean, we have two huge themes, right? The agency of the writer and literary tradition. And I think those two come in quite nicely in a villanelle
Hmm.
because a villanelle is a really restricted form, right? So that's where
Right,
the
right.
writer's agency comes in. Do you break out of this form or not? How do you say what you mean within this form? And then also it's a very traditional format and it originated in Europe. So that's the literary tradition part. Um, so yeah, could you put this synthesis more elegantly?
Hmm. I think you put it pretty elegantly already, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think I have anything else to add.
Mm.
Um, One other question I do have though is why it's named Pasir Ris. Is it just because
Pasir Ris Beach, yeah.
he was just vibing at Pasir Ris and then he decided to write?
Probably.
Oh,
I mean, that's my guess.
yeah, that is a
Yeah.
very logical guess.
Let's move
Right.
on to the next poem then.
Okay.